Oh, you're right, guys. Just give me a sec just to click on these buttons. Get in there. Cool. Hopefully this is working properly. It's been really kind of laggy here, but anyway, yeah, cool. Welcome to this week's live stream, guys. So as usual, two things to bear in mind. So firstly is please don't share any personal data in the chat. If you do, I will ask, well, I'll delete it and ask you to rephrase it. Just ask questions as what if questions. So what if someone was in TA for more than 6 weeks? What would what would the law be? You'll get the same answer, but you don't have to put your personal data. Or other people as well. I keep seeing people kind of put really sensitive data about their family members on there, and I'm as in like kind of on other sort of areas on the internet, sort of Facebook and stuff. So yeah, don't do that. Just bear with me a sec. My computer's now just been really, really weird. I did restart it this time just to try and get it working. It's now got a mind of its own. I assume we're still working. Sorry, guys. Yeah, seems to be okay. Hey, you all right, Michael? Nice to have you here. And secondly, this is not legal advice, so we're going to try our best here to be useful, give some information which is going to help out, but we obviously can't give can't give a detailed kind of overview of your situation because we don't have enough information. And I guess on that point as well, just to say that because we've had a few people just kind of ask, can I book an appointment or a telephone conversation or something like that? Just to say that there's no way we can do that because we can't give a sensible answer without having to read through the whole case really. So that's the kind of danger of kind of giving like a bit of information over the phone or something, is that we just don't have the context, and therefore not only will it probably not be very helpful, but it also means that people can get pissed off with this if we don't give the right answer or whatever. Um, so yeah, other bits and pieces. I thought I'd mention this week just a something to do with the chain database. I can tell you what it stands for in a moment because I don't even know. But basically, chain is a combined homelessness and information network, and it's managed by a charity called Homeless Link, which is kind of like an umbrella charity that sort of kind of disseminates a lot of good information. But in this particular issue, some pretty dodgy stuff, really, in my opinion. And it's significant because if you are homeless and identified as being rough sleeping or at risk of rough sleeping, it seems that your data can kind of go quite a long way with probably actually you realizing it. So if I just share the actual things, I'll show you what I'm talking about. Um, any organization that processes your personal data is a data controller. That's not quite technically true, but anyone you kind of deal with directly will be the data controller rather than a data processor. And this is the policy. Basically, if you're homeless, you should be getting this in writing, really. It really should be in writing, a physical copy rather than just being tucked away on the internet. And every organization has one. And they have to give it within 30 days of them starting to process data, but really it's good practice to get it straight away, really. And it needs to explain in layman's term how that organization is going to use their data, use that person's data. And with data protection law, when you're talking about people who are rough sleeping, you're talking about people who are almost certainly going to be vulnerable in the sense of data protection issues. And that vulnerability means that organizations have to be particularly careful with how they're kind of processing, managing someone's data. So this is the kind of the actual policy. I'm sure you can find it online. So Homeless Link is the controller, the data controller. That means they're basically responsible for anything that goes wrong with it, among other things. It's their job to make sure that the kind of laws complied with. And the first problem with this is that, so it kind of says, why is my information being recorded on chain? Services that record information on chain work on behalf of public authorities to help people who have slept rough in London move away from the streets. On this point, I'd love anyone who works with chain as a system, I'd love you to get in contact, because my understanding is it probably goes a bit further than that, but I might be wrong about that. So, because it certainly seems that quite a few charities will have access to this database, and I don't understand how Homeless Link in effect manage permissions as to who can see what. So as I say, if there's anyone else working with this every day, then yeah, and you want to be helpful, let me know. Yeah, kind of be great to understand this more, because I will probably be contacting Homeless Link and saying, look, this is really problematic. And the first big problem is that they talk about the legal basis for processing this special category data, it will be sensitive because of the nature of what they're asking for. They're asking about health issues, they're asking about sexuality and kind of sex life, things like that. So it's going to be special category data almost immediately, really. Um, and they kind of say that it's carried out in the public interest. Now, public interest, it can be a lawful basis for processing data. When you're processing special category data, it has to be substantial public interest. And that really doesn't actually give organizations the scope they think they have. Basically, to share data in that situation, um, some very, very specific criteria need to apply, and it won't apply in most cases for someone who's on the chain database. And this means that essentially, potentially, chain is going to be in breach of the Data Protection Act. And I'm not quite sure how they, as I say, how they control who sees what. So there's other problems around it. But this can't be a basis really. Really in this situation, you have to think through very carefully how it is you're going to manage or kind of allow kind of to process data in this way, particularly since it seems to be shared with quite a lot of different places. That's another problem actually that it doesn't actually say. So it kind of says the information held on chain is only available to carefully selected organizations, but it doesn't state which ones, and it really should do, because if you are a human being, you have a right to know where your data is going to, particularly when it's special category data. So that would need to be a list of, here are our partner organizations, here's a list, even if it's a, 2 pages long list, that should be set out. You can't just say, oh, carefully selected. That's not giving people, control over their data. Give some examples here. So no second out hubs, hostels, day centers, and some health services. So that's actually quite broad. That's not very specific at all. And because it's not being transparent here, that kind of leads to some further problems. I think that's the only thing. Oh yeah, the other thing that's kind of quite noticeable here is that they retain your data for 15 years, which is an insane amount of time. And I can't see how on earth you could really justify that, because if you were homeless now and then you got housed and you turn up 14 years later and you're homeless again, then they just have to do the assessment again. The information they had from 14 years ago or 15 years ago probably isn't actually going to be very helpful. So in my opinion, this would give rise, if your data was being processed by a chain, and you might not even, and I think you probably wouldn't even know it's actually been done in this way, because I doubt that actually staff are actually kind of really explaining to people what this all involves. But you might well object to it. If you are a little bit concerned if this does apply to you, feel free to get in contact either through the channel or through the Facebook page or something like that, Homelessness Best Practice, because I might be able to give you some, trying to help you navigate what the law is here and kind of what the issues might well be. But just bear in mind, if me and Will a few months ago, we got someone £4,500 compensation for a data breach, which wasn't a million miles away from what we're talking about here. So I expect that it would be fairly straightforward to show that the chain and potentially other partners haven't processed data legally, and that kind of leads to some other issues as well. So yeah, Shannon.
Yeah, I mean, this is pissing me off, as it probably rightly should. But and I agree with everything you've just said. You know that sentence there is just because it was on the screen. Information is only shared with the police if there is a concern about someone's immediate safety or if they need information relating to a very serious offence. That's surely not right either. Because if it's someone's immediate safety, are they talking about a safeguarding alert? Or like, doesn't it need to be more explicit than that? And then also, can the police just access, like, what I don't
Yeah.
understand? This is supposed to be for clients,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to be really clear. Like, isn't it supposed to be? And correct me if I'm wrong, because it's been a while since I've done data protection training. But isn't it supposed to be someone under 15, or is it under the age of 8, or above the age of 8 is supposed to be able to understand this sort of thing?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
I
So,
just what?
yeah. So yeah, I mean, these are all good points here. So basically, it's not clear what that means. What is very serious offence? What does that mean? So yeah, there's various problems with it. I don't think it doesn't sound like police can kind of access it, but I might have, who knows, it might be wrong. And in terms of privacy notices, although consent kind of kicks in when you hit the age of 13 in England or UK, um, privacy notices should be understandable by anyone, which makes it a real challenge to try and explain to a 5-year-old how that this stuff's happening. But that is the way the law works. So basically, this is not, this is designed for, I guess, mostly adults or over 16s, I'd have thought, but it's not. It's unhelpfully vague in issues like this, which again is a problem. So yeah,
I always love that sentence as well, like to help find ways to end homelessness.
yeah,
Like, yeah,
yeah.
that's probably a whole hour discussion in itself, that one little sentence, isn't it?
Yeah, in my experience, these kind of data sharing arrangements, they actually stem from a kind of a community safety, antisocial behaviour enforcement type kind of idea, rather than actually, let's actually deal with this person as a human being and
Because
treat them according to their human rights. Yeah,
yeah, because they won't be recording the statistics of like how many people that they've talked to have been gatekept from a local authority, or how many times they've asked the local authority for help with their housing and like so it's not yeah, okay.
yeah, yeah.
I'm gonna shut
It's
up
as
now
I
because
say,
otherwise I'll go on one.
yeah, yeah. No, as yeah. I've not, I've seen, so I'm going to work out, what's a proportionate thing to do, really. But as I say, if there are people out there who are on the chain database and they didn't like it, and and they wanted to know more, because I think if you did a subject access request with chain, they would have to tell you who they've shared your data with, and that might give rise to some concern, I think, for most people, because you're like, hang on a minute, I didn't know that this my data was going to go to this organization when I had this conversation with the worker. So yeah, as I say, I'll probably be returning to this at some point, and I think I'll probably be writing to Homeless Link to say, just to ask some more questions, if nothing else, really, and just kind of flag these kind of issues. So yeah, but yeah, anyone out there who's kind of affected by this, or I think there might be, it'll be interesting to make contact. So anyway, yeah, cool. Any news from you guys at all this week? So I haven't actually kind of touched base with you yet, but in terms of anything that, yeah, you want to kind of talk about at this point? If
Just a
not,
small
yeah,
tiny thing.
yeah, go
Just
for it.
because it's local to myself and Mike, I saw a BBC News TV thing, lost the words, talking about a supported accommodation provider who they've had issues with their housing benefits, and like 200 residents are going to be decanted and kicked out because they're closing down this supported housing provider. And the TV sort of piece on it frustrated me because it talked about the Supported Housing Act, and as if that was the reason, as you know, they weren't meeting these standards, and so the council had taken away their housing benefits. And I've just managed to find like the article on the news, and it's not anything. It doesn't say anything like that. It says there's like anomalies and some sort of like miscommunication or whatever around housing benefits. But I just think it's interesting that this is perhaps some foreshadowing that might happen, and the sort of appetite for it and what will happen with these 200 people, because I think it's West Northamptonshire, and arguably if they're in supported accommodation they'd be vulnerable, so arguably they should all be entitled to interim accommodation, but it would be yeah just interesting to sort of like watch the space, I guess, and see what happens with it, and I hope those people are able to get sort of good support when approaching the local authority and good advocates.
Yeah, I don't know. I think Accommodation Concern might have some kind of coverage of West Northamptonshire. They're a good organisation, but I don't know anyone that kind of based, I mean, they're based in North Northamptonshire. I don't know if anyone based in West Northamptonshire, whether there is anyone that would be able to help out. I haven't seen that actually, but I'll keep an eye out for it. And I think, yeah, I think you're right. It's foreshadowing just the kind of things that will happen. And also interesting, I mean, I've not seen any articles at all, but that kind of says to me that the kind of the public sympathies with the support, yeah, these poor supported accommodation providers, right, because they do such great work and it's so important that they continue, when really a lot of them are just proper cowboys. I'll put that into the chat just for those who want to have a look at the BBC article. So yeah, right, let's get to questions. So yeah, question came in. Yeah, I've kind of I talked about just people kind of saying or approaching us for individual kind of telephone assessments or whatever, or conversations. Just explain why we can't do that, unfortunately. The other question we've come through the week is not anonymized, so I'll go to the questions in the live stream straight away. So there's just a multi-part here. Let me get the
Sorry, Mike, shall I just add on to the bit about even you guys not taking on phone calls for that minute? But even solicitors wouldn't take on your phone call for that length of time either, because they would have to look at your paperwork and look into your case to be able to provide proper advice and be able to give you some direction in what to do. They'd have to look at everything, the situation as a whole, not just, it's not as simple as just answering that one question.
Yeah. I think it just to kind of exactly. It just becomes a bit of a rabbit warren that you have to kind of get your head around all of it to be able to kind of actually give an answer. Otherwise, it can very easily be the wrong answer. So yeah, thanks, Karis. So question one, and my computer's been very laggy again, so I apologise for this. It's a multi-parter, so let's just get this together. So hold on a second. I think it's 3 parts to this first bit. So yeah, here we go. So yeah, person staying in suitable accommodation, I'm guessing that means unsuitable, is waiting for Section 204 appeal, which is in December. A person's leg condition deteriorated now that the person has difficulty walking a lot. A person contacted solicitor, but the solicitor is completely ignoring the person, only replied about a court fee that a person has to pay. What's the best thing to do now? Make a formal complaint about the solicitor or mention to the manager that if no action reply is given, the person will consider submitting a formal complaint. It's hard to find another solicitor. So I'm going to defer here to Will and Karis to kind of give an answer from a solicitor's point of view here. Like, what's a good way if the solicitor's kind of not responding? I guess there might be good reasons for that, or there might be bad reasons for that. But I guess what's a sensible approach for a client to take to try and get the solicitor to actually respond to the actual situation and kind of get a better outcome. So I'll leave it to you guys. Go on, Karis. Yeah.
Sorry, is Will on? I didn't want to interrupt Will. I would say stick to the question you're asking and chase up that question rather than, it sounds really bad, jump to the complaint first. Try and talk to them about, oh, I want this question answered. Please, could you answer this? And just forward your email you're sending with that question in to get that bit addressed rather than complain, because then you'd have to re-register with another person if you're already in that court appeal process.
Yep. Okay. So yeah. So basically, so it sounds like complaining to a solicitor is kind of like kind of going nuclear, and it's kind of actually going to mean unless you can find another solicitor, you're potentially going to be up the creek without a paddle. Yeah. Okay. I mean, kind of escalating to managers or stuff like that. Is that going to just be seen as shitty, or is that kind of a reasonable thing to do?
If I just come back on that, I think it's always difficult to comment on criticisms of solicitors. It's not that I'm just naturally defensive of solicitors because I am one, but I'm reluctant to sort of throw stones or criticize before knowing the full facts. But if somebody considered me to be ignoring them, and some people may do because I'm very busy, I mean, there's two things you could do. One is you could ask to make an appointment to speak to them about it. And then, I mean, at the end of the day, you should make a complaint if they are completely ignoring you, because that's not good enough. But you should threaten to do so beforehand. Say, look, I've been trying to get hold of you. You're not responding. I'm going to have to make a complaint in 7 days. The other thing I'm slightly worried about is if the person's eligible for legal aid, which they may or may not be, then they shouldn't really be being asked about court fees because legal aid will pay those. So that's a little bit worrying, but I'm not going to go further on criticizing what the solicitor's doing because it may be that the client isn't eligible for legal aid. So I don't think I can add much to that. But the other thing is just to think about making a fresh homelessness application, or I don't know. It's difficult to know whether the 204 is about the suitability of the accommodation or something else. But this is one of the problems of trying to advise on that's why you can't give somebody a half-hour session just on without all the documents.
Yeah. So essentially, in short, write an email the solicitor, say, look, no, know you're busy, or whatever, but I need an answer to this question ASAP. If you don't provide an answer within 7 days, I will consider complaining. Sounds about right. Yep. Cool. Okay. Hey, you're right, Anton. You're right, Martin. Nice to have you here. So question 2. So this is kind of like a follow-on. The person is being contacted with a solicitor from local council about complaints process and the housing case. I've met with a councillor from the local council. This is what the council said in an email. Due to the limited availability of council housing stock, it may be difficult to arrange temporary accommodation before your appeal date. What I can offer is to contact the relevant council department on your behalf to explore any options that may be available to you. Can the councillor help this process somehow? As she replied to the emails, chased up complaints team and offered to contact relevant council department on person's behalf. So yeah, so that's what I mean. I think legally the councillors are a little bit bound as to what they can and can't do, but they can certainly chase up a response. This bit here sounds a bit like a template kind of response to the councillors using here. So that says to me that you're not necessarily talking to or you're talking to a councillor who's probably seen this situation before and kind of knows what to say. So but yeah, councillors, I think, yeah, can the councillor help this process? Yes, they can certainly get emails chased up with the council housing department. They can get complaints responded to more quickly, that sort of thing. As I say, I think legally there are limits to what they can do, but certainly in Bedford, we're lucky with having quite a few councillors who are very active, and they will basically go in and they'll get some kind of outcome, generally speaking, for that situation. So yeah, I'm not sure if I missed another part of the question. I think that's the answer, isn't it? Yeah. So the answer is yes, they can. I think just kind of keep engaging with them, keep like letting them know, what's the situation changing, and so on, and just ask them, can you, again, a little bit, just kind of like what Kara said, kind of ask them a question at a time. So yeah, can you chase the council for this particular response or this particular complaint or something like that? That's probably a good way to approach them, and just kind of try and keep it human, try and interact with them, and just kind of explain what you're going through, as best you can, really, and kind of you'll also be educating them about the state of the council as well. So unless people actually engage with councillors just don't know what's really going on. So good luck with that stuff. I'm hoping that the councillor can actually get a better response than would otherwise be there. So excuse me. Next question that I can see here is as follows. Do you know if a single homeless individual due to domestic abuse, also with autism and ADHD, is eligible to apply to a housing association? How and where should they apply, and what is the average waiting time? So my understanding is that, well, generally speaking, you apply to a housing association through the council's housing register. However, there do appear to be ways in which you can apply directly to them. I have no idea how that happens. I've certainly known people to apply to local housing associations in Bedford outside of the housing register because they were like basically advertising them on the private market, it seemed almost, but they were still social housing. So I think I don't know how that happened. I don't know if it's just whether they were really hard to let properties or something, and they just got, the housing association got desperate. In terms of average waiting times, if we're not talking about the housing register here, then I would have no, I don't even know how you would find out. I think you can FOI housing associations because I think they're doing a public function. So I think you can ask the housing association for average waiting times or something. But certainly I don't know. Yeah, I don't know which housing association we're talking about here or kind of what else would be going on. I think the question would go back to what's happening with a homeless application, because someone in that situation sounds almost certainly going to be in priority needs. And so that would, generally speaking, be the quickest way to get social housing, although you can't guarantee it, as we said many times before, because councils can discharge the main housing duty, the really important one, into private rented accommodation. But yeah, so as I say, I can think of one case maybe a couple of years ago where I was working with someone who we'd made a homeless application and it was kind of like bumping along, and probably there would have been a main duty to them ultimately. But in the meantime, they managed to find this property with a local housing association called BPHA and moved in. Don't even know how it happened, really. It happened very quickly. So I think you can somehow get social housing outside of the usual means, but I think it would depend on the individual housing association. So yeah. So yeah, there's just an associated question actually, which I maybe might be able to answer a bit better. So yeah, do you know what length of time an individual is on the housing register waiting list for a one bed before council usually make a direct offer or permanent home within a housing association? So if you go on the YouTube channel, there's a video I did back in January called something like "How long does it take to get housed?" I might just find the title of it for sure. If I just search for "how long" on the channel, Yeah, there's a video called "How Long Does It Take to Get Housed?" And basically, in that video, I share the stats for every council that responded to an FOI I did. So as most councils did respond, and it's kind of broken down into 1 to 4 bedroom properties, and it ranges from anything from like 6 days up to 87 years. So it's a huge range around the country. But you should, in that video, be able to see that's the average waiting time to get social housing for people owed the main duty, and therefore getting housed in the private sector would be less than that. It's impossible to know for sure because you can't FOI that level of detail. But if, let's say, the average waiting time for a 1 bed in a council was 365 days, you can be sure that if you ended up in private rented, it would take you less than 365 days. It would have to be, like, just logically speaking. So that kind of gives you some understanding of how long it can be or how short it can be. But in London, you can expect to see very long waiting times, unfortunately. And certainly, I think it was newer, my FOI or Tower Hamlets, they basically said, yeah, we don't house homeless applicants in social housing at all. They're all housed in the private rented sector. So yeah, you kind of have councils going that far sometimes. So next, hold on a second. Have I missed something? Oh yeah, sorry, Tiff, I missed your question there. Or is it a question, or is it Yeah, unfortunately, I'm not sure if there's a magic bullet for that. I think your only response, sadly, is to just keep persevering. That's it. There is no other option, really. Um, okay, next question. Is it a must to look for a private property, as it says in personalised housing plan? And if you don't look for private property, what can happen? So, really good question. Within the personalised housing plan, which is or should be based on an assessment they do with you, they will almost certainly have something in there which is just a template saying you must go and look for private rented accommodation. And usually it'll be there are mandatory steps. So there's recommended steps and there's mandatory steps. And technically speaking, if you don't engage with the mandatory step, then the council, this is kind of part of the answer to the question, the council can essentially say that you are unreasonably refusing to cooperate with the personalised housing plan. Now, that's not kind of like a done on a whim. You have to kind of go through quite a lengthy process if you're a council to try and do that, which is why I think most councils can't be bothered. They'll just wait for the relief duty to end anyway. So a lot of times it doesn't really matter. But I guess, yeah, the answer to your question is if it's in the PHP, then yes, you should go and do it and you should be able to evidence it. Because if the council officer says, what have you done to find private rented? And you say, well, I've done nothing, they could, say, start to kind of look down that route of saying you've unreasonably refused to cooperate. Whereas if you can show them some efforts you made, maybe some, kind of viewings you went to or kind of conversations you had with agents or something like that, that says to the council that you are doing it. And when the council officer writes it in the PHP, they know full well that the chance of actually getting housed in private rented sector without, kind of a deposit or, kind of that sort of thing is going to be very, very low. But they'll say it anyway, because if they tell 100 people to do it, then 5 people might find accommodation that way. And then therefore it's kind of achieved what it's aim. So does anyone add anything to that at all?
Could I just add a tiny bit?
Yeah.
I want the question is what, or maybe a further question that follows on from that is what if you don't, can they make a big deal out of it and say, well, you've had your chance and you blew it? And I had a case a few years ago. I think the family were intentionally homeless, and it's another case of what this is before the days of personal housing plans, but it involved an intentionally homeless family applying to children's services for assistance, which is what you had to do in the old days if you were found intentionally homeless, and the children's services always played much tougher than housing, and they were actually playing this line, saying, "There's loads of properties out there. It's just you being lazy and trying to get us to do your work for you. So we're not going to help you. You've got to find somewhere yourself." So I said to the client, "Well, you've got to be seen to be doing this, because if we go to court, a judge will be asking, well, what did you do?" So we put a spreadsheet together, and every day this guy would go looking everywhere he could, and we put it in the spreadsheet and send it to the council. But every time we did it, they just say, "No, not enough." So you could literally spend all day looking for places, and so I couldn't find anywhere, and they'd say, "Well, it's just because you weren't looking hard enough." So it's a bit of a circular argument. And what I would say in this context is if they say there's loads of properties out there and you're just not trying, the question is, well, why haven't you been able to find and point any of these out to us? And they're stuck then, really, because they can't have it both ways. So, but I mean, I think you just have to be seen to be cooperating. But the point I'm making is, even if you do keep a very careful diary of everything you've done, um, if they want to be nasty, they can just ignore any efforts you've made.
Yeah, cool. Thanks, Will. And I think just to take it a step further as well, if the council go down that route of saying that you've unreasonably refused to cooperate, then that would bring the relief duty to an end, which if you're in priority need and not intentionally homeless, you would then in kind of lead to a final accommodation offer or final part six offer. So if you're in priority need, it's not the end of the road. But it's yeah, I guess it's not useful or it's not sensible to start winding up a housing officer. So yeah, I think just kind of yeah, try your best is the answer probably. But ultimately, you know, if you're not successful, I don't think anyone can really blame you for it for reasons Will just gave. I did do a video back in February called "What's the Point of Personalised Housing Plans?" and in that I kind of go into a bit more detail about you kind of what actually is involved in saying that someone's not or someone's unreasonably refusing to cooperate. Um, and also kind of say what the consequences are. You can refuse to cooperate with the PHP at the prevention stage, and there's essentially no consequences if you then become homeless and go to relief stage. But if you don't comply with the steps in the relief stage, then yeah, it does have some consequences, but it's not necessarily fatal, if that makes sense. It's not necessarily kind of a end of sort of thing. So, good question though. Next question. I don't know the answer for sure, but I think it's a no, unfortunately. Oh no, hold on a sec. Come on, Facebook and YouTube, whatever. So if a person has secured a 12-month tenancy for private accommodation, when the 12 months is up, could the person ask for a 5-year secured tenancy agreement for added security on their part? So with private rented accommodation, I think the answer is no. The Renters' Rights Act, as it comes in at some point early next year, probably does slightly make it better for tenants of private accommodation, but not a lot really. But I guess that's the big problem with private renting. That's why people, if they're sensible, will usually prefer social housing because even though it might be a ropey property, kind of damp and mold, at least you've got that kind of that security of tenure which you don't get in the private sector. So I think the answer is no. But if Will or yeah, I'm looking at you, Will, because this is your area really. But I don't know if you know anything that I don't. But I think the answer is no. Right? There's nothing else that you could do to kind of increase the security of a private rented tenancy.
No, I don't think so. No.
Okay, cool. So next question. What if the housing officer hasn't been in touch for a few weeks? Is it up to the priority need tenant to chase them up when the eviction date passes a month ago, or will they wait for court? So, in a I think we're talking here about kind of like at what point in the eviction process does the council have to step in? And I'm taking this to mean that this household is in priority need. They might have children, or they might be already established to be vulnerable or something. So if it matters, so sometimes it doesn't matter if the housing officer's not contacted you because it's in relief duty and it's nothing really happening. But if it's a situation where the Section 21 has expired and the landlord is serious about evicting you and there's no defence in court, then potentially the interim accommodation duty is actually already kicked in at that point. But lots of councils just don't care, and lots of councils, it seems, have taken the line that they'll rather just take the risk and maybe they'll have to pay compensation if they get caught doing it, and they'll just therefore blatantly tell people that they've got to wait until the bailiff comes. But yeah, I think so. That's not what the law is. I mean, there's a number of videos on this channel with more information, which if you search for the term bailiff, you'll get them on the channel, because it goes into some detail about, first of all, what the law is, and secondly, how people can get compensation when that sort of thing happens. But yeah, I think if you're in a situation where the Section 21's expired, you're in priority needs, you want to be out, you don't have to risk paying the court costs and so on, then you really do want to kind of pursue it quite vigorously at the time. Kind of make a complaint, involve the counsellors. If you have the access to a solicitor, then try and get a solicitor, because those things are going to be necessary to get the council to act. They will happily not respond, and if you just get angry about it, they don't really care. They're only going to start caring if you do something effective, like making a complaint, complaining to a counsellor, or getting a solicitor involved. Otherwise, they'll just kind of shrug it off, really. So I think that's what you have to do these days to get a council to follow the law, is to kind of escalate it quite effectively to kind of get them to actually do what they should do. On the videos about the bailiffs, there is in fact, I might as well show you this as well. So if I just put, hold on a sec. So I've talked about this before, but I think it's just good to familiarize yourself with it, because it's quite a good resource, really. So it's on Will's website, and I've just put it in the live chat as well. So this is like it's the LGSEO database. If I just share that screen, I'll show you what I'm doing. So this is what it looks like if you go to it, and then if you just search for the term bailiff, you basically get a bunch of LGSEO decisions which involve people getting compensation for being told to wait until the bailiff comes. So if you then take if you take this number here, for example, I forgot how to use it. There we go. So if you take this number here, copy and paste it, and you go through to the LGO decisions, which looks like this. So it's lgo.org.uk/decisions. You put the reference number in. That then brings up the actual case, and then you've got a lot of detail about what the law is, because the LGO always start by saying what the law is. So they kind of lay out these different categories. So it talks about, kind of, at what point do you become homeless when the Section 21 has been served? And the answer is usually it's going to be when the Section 21 is expired. And it then goes into the kind of other bits. So this case, they should have been provided with interim accommodation earlier. And so this gives you that overview of what then happens. And then you kind of get down to the bottom. So this Mr. X and Miss Y gets £500 compensation for the distress and £460 to cover the court costs, in effect. So it's not a lot of money, but it's better than a poke in the eye, as I say. So that's something, as I say, if you go to the database, you can kind of pick up different keywords like bailiff or like interim accommodation or gatekeeping or whatever, and you should be able to find some LGO decisions which basically give you a bit more detail and can be really helpful. So hopefully, again, guys, if you want to add anything to that, just chip in. But hopefully that all made sense. So there's just a bit more to that question, actually. There you go. So yeah. Okay. Next question. I don't know how good an answer we can give for this, but we'll try. Do you recommend applying to housing associations? Are they a good option? I know you don't recommend domestic abuse or refuges. So it's not. I mean, I don't know. I'm obviously never stayed in one myself, so I don't know. But certainly, I know a lot of people who move into refuges, and they're not very nice environments. But then again, there's a lot of emergency accommodation, so you never know what you get there. But I think my big bugbear with refuges is that they don't start the homes application when they should, and so they kind of wait for people to have waited there for 3 months before they even start looking at housing. And actually, legally, if you're in a refuge, you're legally homeless, you should be able to make a homes application or be assisted to make a homes application on day one. So I think that's the problem I've got with them. Also, they don't really have much provision for people with disabilities. As in whatever little provision there is often, kind of just not available when you actually need it. And there's just, I guess, it's just an institution, really. So I'm sure there are better refuges than others, but that's I guess my position is just, even before you even look at the service provided, it's the fact that you don't get that kind of quick access to or assistance to approach a council. So do you guys want to add anything to that at all? Because I'm sure there are people out there who've had a good experience of refuges, don't get me wrong. But generally speaking, in my experience, people would generally prefer to make a homes application and just be treated lawfully and get housed that way. Certainly quicker to get housed ultimately. So
I would just say very quickly, my understanding, I mean, going back to the 70s and 80s, when when you first sort of started hearing about refugees, was that they were never meant to be sort of more than an emergency measure. And so it's crazy. I mean, it's not really an appropriate place to live for very long. I mean, it's unfortunate they have become. I was dealing with somebody this week who's been in a refuge for over a year. I mean, that's partly because two different local authorities have well and truly messed her around. But you think, geez, that's a hell of a long time. And she's got a 10-year-old son, and there is a sort of politics that says, I'm not sure at what age, because some of them have a no men policy. So I'm not sure at what age a 10-year-old boy starts being looked at as a possible man rather than a boy. But it's quite young, and but I don't think anybody, even the most sort of ardent defender of refuges, would say they were intended as anything other than very short-term transitional places. Correct me if I'm wrong, anyone out there. Sorry, that's my
No,
little.
no, no. I think that's. I mean, that's why you're still considered to be homeless whilst you're in a
Yeah,
refuge.
quite rightly, yeah.
Yeah. Karis?
Oh, sorry, I was just gonna add that refugees, they'll have their own charity ideals. So it's not about you being homeless, so they may not have the adequate materials to address your homelessness situation because they're addressing the domestic violence situation, and which is exactly what you said. But it's a different aspect and it's meant for a short-term situation.
Yeah. So certainly, I mean, me and Shannon have trained some people in refuges and working in refuges, and yeah, even the policies themselves, like the standard policies that you see are just not lawful. As in, not that they're not lawful, they just they don't kind of think, okay, we could get people making a homeless application on day 1 or day 2 rather than day 90, and that just
It's not
leads
on
to
their
deadlock.
agenda sometimes. It's not
Yeah, yeah. So I
on the
think
radar.
that's
Did they
yeah.
justify making them wait 90 days?
Yeah, I mean, so basically, you have these kind of like off-piste sort of agreements between local authorities and refuges where I mean, certainly some, I mean, there's a range, obviously. I remember one organisation I trained, they seemed very reluctant to challenge the council at all. And I was like, well, your clients are clearly worse off because you're not making use of the legislation properly. And they weren't particularly keen on doing anything about it. So that was a bit of a pity, really, in my opinion. But yeah, so there are kind of refuges where there's this kind of like written policy which says, until you've been here 3 months, we won't look at your housing, or we won't get you onto the housing list yet. When, as I say, really, like, it can be done a lot quicker than that in most places. So yeah, it just seems to be kind of bit of a missed opportunity at best, really. Yeah,
And it should work in collaboration with domestic abuse, family solicitors, and housing solicitors should work in a collaborative manner to get everything sorted.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
And the council.
yeah, the law is pretty darn good when it comes to domestic abuse. The problem is that, first of all, a lot of specialist domestic abuse services don't really seem to consider homelessness law at all. They kind of look at other kind of remedies, as Kara says, kind of family courts and so on. But there's often this kind of really sort of obvious, easy way to improve the situation, which is by making a homeless application and getting suitably housed, which doesn't seem to be on their radar for whatever reason. So yeah, Shannon.
Yeah, just because I've seen their follow-up comment about like whether it's worth applying to a housing association. And sorry, because I spaced a little bit, so you might have already answered this. But it is worth applying to housing associations, but it will just be different in different areas. So yeah, if you've got someone who's fled domestic abuse or what have you in this situation, it'd still be worth applying to housing associations, but as I'm sure we've already covered, so apologies if I'm just repeating things. But it is worth making the homeless application first, and then you would apply to housing associations through the housing register.
Yeah,
So you need to be eligible for a housing association.
yeah. So so this came up a few weeks ago because it seems like there's a slight change in law around Part 6 and domestic abuse, but this is where it's very difficult to give a generic answer, because in some areas the way the allocation policy is written means that you might actually be better not being treated as homeless if you're a domestic abuse survivor. Um, but I'd say make the homeless application and have a sensible conversation with the housing officer, who can then tell you why not to make the homeless application. It's because it might be a situation where, if you might get band A or something if you're in a refuge, but if you make a homeless application and go into interim accommodation, you go down to band D or whatever. So it's difficult to kind of give. I mean, most councils it's not like that. Most councils it does, seem to be pretty sensible when it comes to DA, but not always. So yeah. Also, guys, I've just put a thing in the just a comment in the chat there, just to say that any further questions from that comment basically will you have to roll over to next week, because I've just seen there's a bunch that have come in that I've not got to yet. So and I've now lost my place, which is awesome. Hold on, where is it? So bear with me. Right, here we go. Yeah, this is where we're at. So yeah, question 8. Is everyone given a personalised housing plan, especially those already suitably housed in a room and shared house, and everyone expected to live for private renters? So if you're suitably housed, you're not homeless, and so no, you won't get PHP, because the personalised housing plan is part of the homeless application process. But that what that means is everyone who makes a homeless application should get a PHP very early on in the process. Within 10 working days seems to be like too long, basically, according to the LGO. It's not actually set out in law. If I'm reading that question correctly, if you're suitably housed already, then no, you won't ever see a PHP, because you're not going through the process. But I'm not quite sure what else to add to that. But yeah, I think that hopefully we'll kind of answer it for the time being. So bear with me. Question 9. I think this is a two-parter. Hold on a sec. There's no more to it. Cool, I think that's it. So, person has received a non-priority decision, but there's some big mistakes made by the council. For example, not recognising limited capability of work. Could suggest priority need. No medical opinions obtained to evaluate medical info. Hasn't looked forward to effective homelessness on conditions. That's probably actually the most fatal thing in there, because that's the point of the evaluation. No recognition that medical situation amounts to disability. No, yeah, that's another fatal problem there. No kind of public sector equality duty stuff explored. No TA offered, but Section 2 deadline was over a month ago. So hold on. Is there a bit more to this question? There's a bit more to it. Hold on. So I apologise if I missed something here. Worth them trying to get late Section 202, or should they just go straight forward to new application? Issue is there's no new info. It's just not been properly evaluated. So yeah, this is really good question here. This is a genuine problem you can run into. I would argue that you might be able to, although the actual person's health might not have changed, if there was information which wasn't looked into. So, for example, if they didn't look into, where's my cursor gone? So if they didn't look into the effect of homelessness on the conditions, and you were able to get some kind of evidence which says being homeless would affect this condition, and it wouldn't necessarily need to be a fresh assessment by a doctor, in my opinion. Let's say you have someone, as you use the example a lot of someone with arthritis, because it's a condition which is affected by cold. If someone has arthritis, they make a homeless application, they're deemed not in priority needs, and there's no assessment of what's going to happen to them if they become homeless. If you then said, well, arthritis is a condition which gets worse if you are homeless, if you're in the cold and you're cold and wet and whatever, then I would say that I would argue that is new information which would trigger a fresh application. The actual amount of information you need to trigger a fresh application is very low, really. We discussed on Will's channel back at the beginning of the year the Ivory v Welling Hatfield case, which basically says, really, I think in that case it even was exactly this, where the person's health hadn't changed, but there was a new bit of information about, it was a new assessment actually in that case, which triggered the fresh application. So I don't know if you guys want to add anything. I think I could waffled with that one, but I think there is more to say about this issue, because it's a genuinely complex bit of the law.
Could I dive in on that one for a minute?
Yeah.
I'll not stop me if I go on too long. So I would say don't worry too much about the Section 202 deadline here, because some councils may treat it like it's some sort of children's game where, oh no, sorry, you missed the deadline, so all your rights have been forfeited, and you even we can't consider you anymore. Now the Section 202 review is only one step. If they won't carry out a Section 202 review, then you could go for a judicial review. But what you'd need to do in this situation before you do that is you can ask them to accept a Section 202 review out of time, which they can do. And then you can ask them to reconsider the decision in any event, because of the new, you can make new representations. And then while you're at it, you could just say, can you accept a fresh application based on these representations? So that when you do go for judicial review, you can hit them with all three of those things, because you can say, look, I've got a really strong case here. The only thing that's stopping me getting redress for this grievance is the fact that I missed a deadline, and the council have unreasonably refused to agree. I mean, there might have been a good reason why you missed the deadline, but even if there wasn't, you can say, well, I'm asking you to reconsider it. It's clear there was serious problems, and if you won't, then try and get a High Court judge to do it on the basis that the deadline for challenging something by judicial review is 3 months rather than 8 weeks. But even then, it would be 3 months from when you ask them to reconsider it. So I would say try and get a judicial review off the ground. Obviously you won't be able to issue a Section 204 appeal, because you're out of time for challenging that. I hope that makes sense. So don't give up.
Wouldn't you need a lawyer to do that though?
Yes.
Which leads us to the question of how's Virgo's capacity at the moment? Have you got space to take on new clients?
Well, what do you think, Karis? I mean, we're pretty busy, aren't we? But we've been trying to sort of get around this problem of there being just another solicitor saying no capacity. But well, yeah. Sorry, I didn't let you answer.
Um, yeah, we can put it. It's just everyone's on holiday at the moment, so we are, like you say, stretched in capacity. But
We
I
get
would
in
say,
touch. Maybe
yeah,
we can take that on.
yeah.
I wonder if this worker could try making a fresh application in the meantime. Kind of doing the best they can with this argument, and then just if that doesn't then work out, maybe next week, sort of trying to approach Virgos after the bank holiday weekend.
Is there a link to the form in the
There
notes?
will be on the description, but I can put it onto the live chat as well if that helps. Guess it does help, doesn't it? So hold on. So yeah, this is. I'm just going to link to. There's like a little kind of sort of self-assessment form which will kind of get you into contact with Virgos. I'll put it into live chat now.
Would it also be worth taking it to the LGO? I know they haven't gone through the complaints process and what have you, but based on the LGO guidance that came out ages ago, and I'm hoping you'll remember which one it was and everything else, where they said about it being unreasonable to expect clients to pursue JRs. I wonder if it's almost worth going to the LGO with like an urgent case and saying, look, really up the creek here. Is there any chance you can get them to speed up the 202 review or accept new information or whatever it is? I don't know
Yeah.
if that's useful, and I go into local councils and things like that in the meantime as well.
Yeah.
But
No.
the
Sorry.
LGO doesn't get involved with legal proceedings. No.
Yeah, but potentially what they might pick up on is in fact, no, I might have misread it wrong. When you said the Section 202 deadline was over a month ago, was that the council's deadline to respond to the Section 202, or was it that? Because I don't see a. Oh no, yeah, no, maybe I just read that wrong. So sorry, Kerry. Yeah, so yeah, I've read the whole situation wrong actually. Yeah, but that does mean I think making a fresh application would be easier than I originally thought, because I had in my head there that the Section 202 was just basically in limbo, but actually the person didn't ask for a Section 202 if I read
Same
that correctly.
apologies. Yeah, I read it
Yeah.
wrong as well. Sorry.
So yeah, so yeah, I mean, the LGO, like, had it been a case where the council hadn't provided or hadn't responded to a Section 202 review within the 8 week time limit, and kind of it wasn't going anywhere, then potentially that would be something the LGO would maybe take an interest in. But yeah, but it's in one sense, yeah, it's Kara says it's a technical argument about kind of whether the law's been followed here rather than the more sort of process stuff that the LGO looks at. So yeah, good luck to that person, because that's yeah, worth fighting for, I'd say. So where have I got to? I feel like I might miss something here, but let's just go to the next one. Because now I actually don't understand this question here, but let's put it on there anyway in case someone else does. So what chances does someone have if they're in band of SV? So I think SVOP is something which corresponds to a particular council's policy, and I don't know what that means. That seems to be a local thing, and normally comes number 60 when bidding out of 1,973. So I mean, I probably need more information to actually fully understand the question, but I think if you're coming position 60 out of 2,000, then I don't think you're going to get it housed anytime soon. It's going to be, well, I don't know, who knows how long it's going to be, but it's not going to be next week. I think that's pretty safe to say. So yeah, and it's really weird the way bidding works, because I have seen people like come like 10th or something and still actually they're the ones they go on to get the property, and people who finish first kind of don't for whatever reason. So it's even kind of more complicated than what it would initially seem. But I think the answer is we can't really tell you, but it's going to be a long time, I think, depending which council you're in. Certainly closer to London or Birmingham you are, the worse it gets as a general rule. So yeah, so sorry I couldn't be more helpful there. So yeah, so I think this is the next question here, number 11. At what point in the homeless application process would someone need a solicitor, and how difficult is it to find a legal aid one? So it's difficult for sure. As I say, Virgos may have capacity, but yeah, Will and Karis work very work a lot is the yeah, kind of the general kind of default. In terms of what process the home, at what point do you actually involve a solicitor? I think the answer to that is as soon as something goes wrong. So if you make a homeless application and the council don't respond to it, or they deny interim accommodation when clearly there is reason to believe that person might hit the threshold, then I'd say that's when you involve the solicitor. In a perfect world, I guess you'd have a solicitor start with the process from the start, but I don't think that is how it works in reality. So again, Will or Karis, feel free to add to my answer there. But I think the answer is as soon as you know something's gone wrong, that's when you can invoke a solicitor and they can actually do something. Because before that, they're like, what they're actually doing. They're not. Yeah, their job is to kind of argue, I guess. And if the council's not done anything wrong yet, then there's nothing to argue about. So yeah.
If I just add to that, I think really looking at it objectively, the problem is you won't know that you need a solicitor until maybe it's later than you think, as it were. But in theory, you need a solicitor really at any point, because you could need a solicitor at the time of your very first encounter with the council when you could get gate kept or given some advice about what's a homelessness application or something. And that could then you could need a if you manage to get a really good service, you could still need a solicitor right at the end of your homeless application, perhaps when you get offered what you consider to be unsuitable accommodation. So it really covers the whole ambit, and there's lots of scope for the council to get things wrong. So if in doubt, go for it as early as possible, I'd say, because a lot of people, they wait weeks getting fobbed off by councils with gatekeeping excuses.
So, can I ask a follow-up question? Sorry. But so with that, Will, how long does it take to say I fill in your form? How long does it take between me filling it in to the work being done to fight the injustice or whatever? Or is it like triaged and it depends on what's happening and it's sort of prioritized? Or because in my head, as someone with like anxiety and previous like housing, whatever, I'd be like, right, I know I'm going to be evicted in 4 weeks. I'm going to contact all the legal aid solicitors now and then have them on like the back burner, knowing that the process. But I guess would that bump me down then in the priority list, or how long does that sort of take?
Do you want to answer that, Oh, well, I'm sorry, you asked me. So I will say, it depends. I mean, it will be triaged, yes. And that can take some time, but it depends on how quickly you or whoever the client is can provide the information. The biggest problem we have as solicitors is that our initial work is done under what's called the legal help scheme, which the legal aid funds, but they will only pay us at the end of the case if we got proof of income at the beginning of the case. So if we don't get the bank statement showing that somebody was correctly getting universal credit or whatever at the beginning, they'll say, we're not paying you for any of this work. So we have to be really tough and say to people, look, we can't start work on your case till you've given us this stuff. And unfortunately, a lot of people, if you leave it until the end of the case to say, oh, I forgot to ask you for this, you won't hear from them again because they'll either be pissed off because they didn't win the case, or they'll be not bothered because they won it and they haven't got a problem anymore. But it won't bump you down the list. I mean, if you got the stuff to us quickly, then we'd try and start work on the case as quickly as we could. Obviously, if you said, I'm going to be evicted tomorrow, people might be ringing alarm bells and things. You might get dealt with quicker than if it was 4 weeks. But in theory, it's turned around quite fast because once we get on board, we have to be very careful that we're not responsible for some deadline being missed or something. I hope that answers it.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think it'll be good for people to know when they're contacting you, like what they can prepare to do beforehand was all.
Yeah.
Yeah, so people often think, so you'll work with file opening, you'll have a file opening procedure that will go through your eligibility and if you're eligible for legal aid. And then we get what happened and then it comes to us. So there's a timeline. Oh,
Cool. I've just messed up. Hold on a sec. Yeah, thanks, guys. I was zoned out there whilst I was trying to put this question together. But yeah, the final question for this week is, and just to reiterate, for those who want to ask new questions after that post I put in there, just roll your question onto next week, and we'll kind of hopefully pick it up then. But I won't remember, so you need to ask again. And just to again make that point, the best way to ask questions is by submitting them on any video comment on the channel at any point in the next 7 days, because we'll then get some notice and we'll answer the question first. Whereas if you ask in the live stream, you've also got a character limit, but it just means that you're going to get it's going to take a bit longer to get an answer basically. But this is the final question that came through the week. It's not anonymized, which is why I'm doing it last. But yeah, so I've lived in District A for the last 6 years with my 3 children and my wife. Submitted my homeless application last year, which was accepted. Been following what council was asking. Now we received bailiff to leave the property, and my council officer keeps asking me to find private rented property out of District A borough and ignoring our local connection. Can they legally do that? So any accommodation the council is going to use to discharge any duty to you has to be suitable, and that has to include an assessment of the location of the property. And so things like schools, employment, support networks will be relevant, and they need to be taken into account. And there will, I guess, be times when you live, in District A, and the council find a property just over in District B, and it's like 10-minute drive or something. In one sense, that wouldn't be a problem at all, provided they have kind of assessed the right things. I think me and Will keep saying we're going to do a proper video about this at some point, and we just never get the time to do it. But I think essentially they certainly can't. Yeah, they need to have done an assessment in their paperwork which shows that any property they offer is suitable, and it needs to take those things into account. It also needs to take into account things like affordability. But yeah, location is important, and there's a case which maybe we should just start by doing that. We'll just kind of do a video about YRV Lambeth, because it's a good case in just terms of seeing how it all works in practice. Because in theory, councils can house you a long way away, provided they are satisfied it's suitable for you. So it doesn't have to be in your district, even if you do have a local connection, as bizarre as that seems. So yeah, Will, do you want anything to that at all?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry if I'm missing something, Mike. But it looks to me that this is a much more serious case, where the person is being much more seriously messed around and simply being offered accommodation a long way away. Because here they're not being offered any accommodation; they're being told to go and find their own accommodation. outside so they're saying not only go and find your own accommodation, but please go and find it somewhere else, um, which seems to be sort of adding insult to injury. So what they should have done is when they made the homelessness application, they should have processed that and either said to them, then we don't think you're homeless yet for whatever reason, but it looks as if the possession proceedings have been ticking along. So if there was a valid Section 21 notice way back when, then they should have considered accepting them as homeless back then and then making proposals to provide accommodation. But what seems to have happened here is that they're going to the council and they're saying, oh, it's you again, come back another day, come back another day. And they've left it as this always used this is a very common problem. And then when you get they'll often say, wait till you get the possession order and you do that. And then they say, oh, wait till you get the bailiff's notice. And then you get the bailiff's notice, it says we're coming to evict you on Thursday the 15th or something. And then they say, well, come and see us on Thursday the 15th. And when you do that, there's sort of some excuse then. So what I would say is you should definitely challenge this because it sounds like they haven't processed. Am I right, Mike? They haven't even processed the application.
Yeah, I missed that entire aspect. I was
Yeah.
just looking at the location. So yeah, you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
They, I mean, they're in priority need. They've got dependent children. As we kind of said already, and there are videos on the channel about this kind of whole Section 21 process. At what point you become homeless. So yeah, well, yeah, thanks for picking up on it, Will, because I missed it. So yeah, I mean, I think in fact, I answered a different question. I answered the question: could the council provide accommodation in a different
Oh,
area,
yeah.
rather than should you have to go and find it yourself?
No,
in
you were
another
right
area?
on that level. If they'd
Yeah,
accepted a duty and said, we've got you an offer somewhere else, then it would just be a question. You'd have to, it would then be over to you to show why that was unsuitable, yeah?
yeah. Um, okay, cool. I think that's it, guys. Thanks, Will, Shannon, and Karis, for your time again. We've done like well over 100 of these now.
Good luck.
So yeah, that's like 4 solid days just talking. But yeah, um, as always, guys, hopefully this has been useful. Hopefully there's some interesting stuff there. Keep the questions coming. For those who've asked questions, I hope we've kind of given some kind of clarity, even if we're not able to fully answer it. And I think, yeah, kind of going back to that kind of question that came up earlier, that sort of offhand question. I think the only thing you can do sometimes is just persevere and just keep going through the process, keep it methodical. That's the thing which is going to win an argument with the council. If you give up at any point, then yeah, that's going to be the end of the process for you, really. So, but yeah, that's easier said than done. So yeah, Will, it's bank holiday Monday on
Yeah, I think
Monday.
that makes it even less likely that I'll get that off the ground on Monday. And I'm so busy that I'll probably be working Monday, but not have time to do the live stream. So maybe we'll just be back on Thursday, yeah.
Yeah,
If
I think I might run one of the other live streams on Tuesday evening. I'll just see who's around for it. But yeah, we'll definitely be back next Thursday. So yeah, hopefully see you then, guys. Take care.